Dear friends, I'm very happy that the fifth year of the Conservative Summit is being more and more popular throughout Europe, that we have more and more people from abroad, because if this was to be a purely Slovak Conservative Summit, I guess that we would be addressing a different issue, an issue about emigration, about people moving from Slovakia to Czech Republic and other countries. But here we are because the issue of immigration is one that is of utmost importance to the European continent at large, and is the elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed in a civic discussion, which unfortunately in the western part of the continent is becoming more and more difficult to have. Sometimes, you know, you have this clumsy elephant in the room that goes on and you have a lot of mess. You have destroyed vases, broken plates, broken dishes, because, well, the elephant is clumsy. And if you want to comment on the fact that the elephant is clumsy and is destroying the dishes and the vases, and you have broken plates, like Tommy Robinson in England speaking about the rape gangs from Pakistan, were it not for Elon Musk taking an active stance with the issue, who knows whether he would still not be detained. Then you have the issue of the young German activist Naomi Seibt, who tried to say that, well, you know, there are things about German identity that you can be proud of, and that there are also issues coming with migration that are rather problematic. Using this democratic right of freedom of expression caused her to be harassed, not only by violent left-wing activists, but apparently also by, I learned that the German Secret Service or something like that. And as a result, she has applied for asylum in the United States as part of the extension for asylum for people who try to use the freedom of expression and are critical of immigration in Europe. And then a few days ago, I have learned about this person from Mouvement Chouan, Jean-Eudes Gana, who was apparently arrested because he said that there is some problems coming with a change of the landscape of his hometown. I wish to express my sympathies to Jean-Eudes Gana and to all people who are facing prosecution just for stating the obvious, that there are issues connected to immigration that are rather negative. And so I'm happy that here in Slovakia, first, that this is not an issue that is facing this country in such a large extent, and second, that we are able to have a civil discussion about the issue. And to this discussion about the issue of immigration, I wish to introduce our four speakers. So we have Philip Pilkington, who is a macroeconomist and former investment professional. He works as a senior research fellow at the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, focusing on macroeconomic and geoeconomic issues. He is the founder of Multipolarity podcast and author of Reformation in Economics, and the forthcoming book, The Collapse of Global Liberalism. His writings appeared in numerous outlets, including The Telegraph, The New York Post, American Affairs, Post-Liberal Order, The Spectator, and others. Then, next to him is Marco Malaguti, a conservative philosopher, columnist, and blogger who works at the Machiavelli Centro Studi Politici e Strategici as a research fellow, deals with the areas of education, philosophy, and focuses on Central European affairs and politics. Then, to his right-hand side is Lucas Chancerelle, a patriotic French entrepreneur, journalist from Bretagne. He has been an activist for national identity since 15. He has a master in private law, and currently he focuses on two activities. First is an incubator for patriotic entrepreneurs called L'Enid, and second, he defends his ideas in the media on TV Liberté, a French media platform with 1 million subscribers. And last but not least, I wish to welcome Omar Saifo, who obtained his degree at Department of Semitic Philology and Arabic, and then also at Political Science. He wrote his dissertation on Arabic media, and he currently is a member of Migration Research Institute, where he focuses on the integration of European Muslim diaspora communities and the dynamics of Middle Eastern cultural societies. So, without further ado, I wish to give the floor to Mr. Pilkington.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I think the conservative movement faces a bit of a dilemma at the moment with regard to the migration issue. I don't know if people are familiar with the Soviet film of Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker. The premise of the film is that you go into the zone and you find this room and it will give you your deepest desires. And when people get near the room, they don't want to go in because they don't really want to know what they actually want. And I fear that something similar might be facing the conservative movement at the moment, because the conservative movement is probably going to come to power in the next 5 to 10 years across Europe. I mean, that's becoming increasingly clear. They're already in power in America, and it looks like very soon Reform UK will be in power in Britain. And I think they're going to face a problem, actually, with migration, because I don't think that they fully understood the roots of it. So I'm going to go into a little bit of that. I'm going to use Britain as an example. As the former speaker said, I'm currently living in Hungary, but I lived in Britain for a long time. And I saw the migration debate take place in Britain during and after the Brexit movement and during the ministry of Boris Johnson. The main focus in Britain, the main popular focus on migration, tends to center around boats illegally crossing the English Channel. You might have heard "stop the boats." That's quite a common refrain. In fact, in the past 10 years, boats have only accounted for about 1.9% of total migration to Britain. That's if you believe the statistics on the boats, which I don't. I'd say it's about a quarter of that. It's probably not even 1%. The main problem in Britain and elsewhere in Europe with migration is legal migration. Even this is subject to what I would consider disinformation in British political life. Anti-migrationists in Britain talk about dependents. And they talk about dependents as if these are people who are claiming welfare. That's not what a dependent is in Britain. What a dependent is in Britain is when you come legally on a visa and you bring somebody else in with you, a family member, a spouse, a child, or something like that. The dependents work. They're not on welfare, they work. The reality in Britain is that the British Treasury controls the migration policy, and the Home Office, that's supposed to control the migration policy, facilitates it and ensures that there isn't too much dissent around it. That's what happens. Now, that seems strange that the British Treasury would control the migration policy. Why would a Treasury control migration policy. Well, Boris Johnson has admitted this. In a recent interview to The Spectator, he was asked about the so-called Boris wave. This is an enormous wave of migration from outside of the European Union that took place during Boris Johnson's ministry. And of course, this was unusual, or at least people think it's unusual, because Boris Johnson ran on an anti-immigration platform, and he was the main proponent of Brexit. Well, not the main proponent, but he was the one that was supposed to get Brexit done. So what did the Treasury say to him? They said to him, you have two choices. You can either allow the migration, or the British economy will collapse. It will go bankrupt under your ministry. That was the choice that he was given. He said it in the Spectator interview. Now, I've known this for some time, but it's not widely known in Britain, and the British Conservative movement has not come to terms with it. Before I left Britain, we published a paper with the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, myself and Paul Morland, who's a demographer, in Britain, and we called it Migration, Stagnation, or Procreation, Quantifying the Demographic Trilemma. A trilemma is a set of circumstances where you can have two but not three. Two but not three things. You might think of it as a triangle. You can have this side, you can have this side, you can have this side, but you can't have all three. And the trilemma involves ethnic continuity, that is a lack of migration, economic growth, speaks for itself, or low fertility. And what we argued was you can have low fertility and migration, low fertility and economic growth, and no ethnic continuity. You can have low fertility and ethnic continuity and no economic growth, economic collapse in the case of Britain, or you can have economic growth and ethnic continuity, but you cannot have low fertility. Those are the choices. In the case of the UK, since 2020, all of the population growth has come from migration, all of it since 2020. In Europe, all of the population growth has come from migration since 2015, the year of the so-called crisis. It was no crisis. It was the treasuries in Europe pushing for more migration to ensure that the economy kept growing. So in the paper, we ran some projections to see, what these scenarios would look like. And effectively, to keep the British economy stable, first-generation immigrants would make up between 38% and 54% of the population by 2080. That's first-generation immigrants, people not born there, probably don't speak the language. I mean, at that point, the British society will look like an airport. It won't be a society. I don't know what you'd call that. It won't be a society. But those are the demographic realities facing Britain. And I don't think the British Conservative movement are ready to face them yet. They face that because there hasn't been above replacement birth rates since 1971, half a century. Just to give some sense of how destabilizing that will likely be, we take the US as the example. The US is the only country that's really integrated mass migration flows. You can talk about somewhere like Australia, but I think that's misleading because it was basically a settler society. So I think the United States is the best example of a relatively well-established country that was then subject to enormous migration flows and successfully integrated them. The migration flows came in the late 19th and early 20th century. They came from Europe, they came from this region, but mainly they came from Ireland, Italy, Poland, and so on. At the very peak of that migration wave, just under 15% of the population were first-generation immigrants. Now, we're currently at 15% in Britain, in America today. In Ireland, it's even worse. It's above 20%. That's my country. Now, the 15% number, so just keep that in mind, that in the Great Migration Wave in America, they got just under 15% of the population. And the mythology that Americans tell themselves today is that this was integrated without any effort at all. That is a complete lie. It is a lie that the Americans tell themselves. It is not true. Prior to the Great Migration Wave, the United States had similar homicide rates to Europe, about 1 per 100,000. Afterwards, they had 5 times that, and they remain 5 times that. A lack of ethnic continuity leads to very, very high crime. And America is a high-crime society, not because of the pioneer mindset or any of those mythologies that you hear. It's because of a lack of ethnic homogeneity. Another component of that integration, which is being covered up in America, I would argue, is the gangster, the wave of gangsters in the 1920s and 1930s, the mobs. You've seen the films. Those aren't mobs, that's ethnic violence. That is ethnic violence. And they relabeled it as gangsterism. But of course, the gangs themselves, there was a Jewish mafia, there was an Irish mafia, there was an Italian mafia, and they were fighting each other. This was ethnic violence. It took a long time to put that back together. Only by the baby boomer generation had they successfully intermixed those European populations. And the society remains much more violent than Europe. So it's not easy to integrate. And that was European populations. Those were all Christians, mostly Catholics. If we're not obviously importing mainly Christian populations, and they're much more culturally foreign than the Catholics, mainly Catholics that went, Catholics and Jews, I suppose, that went to America. So, if anything, it seems likely that it'll be even more difficult to integrate. But again, remember these numbers. I'm saying that it was that difficult for the United States to integrate just under 15% of the population, and the study that we ran in Britain showed 38 to 54% by 2080. And you can say, oh, well, that's not going to work. Well, it's not going to work. I'll tell you right now it's not going to work. But then you say, okay, well, then we'll just stop the migration and we'll take the hit on the economy. It doesn't work like that. It's not just that economic growth will be slow. It's that your welfare state won't be fundable. It's that your public debt won't be financeable. Just take Britain as an example again. Britain is close to bankruptcy. It's very close to bankruptcy. One of the former senior economists came out recently in August, I think, and said that the UK might end up going for an IMF bailout. If there is just a couple of bad periods of growth in Britain, the economy will just fall apart and they'll end up in a bailout. Now, the only way to keep economic growth going in Britain, because there's no productivity growth, is population growth. And there's no domestic population growth, so they have to import more and more people. And every prime minister is going to be confronted with this. If and when Nigel Farage gets elected Prime Minister of Britain, he will be told the same thing by the British Treasury. And if I were to bet, he will go along with it. There will be a Farage wave in 2029, 2030. That's just the reality because of the demographic issues. So the only way, I'll just give one more example because it's in the news recently. Japan just elected an anti-migration Prime Minister, as people probably know. Now the focus again has been on illegal migration. That's not the problem in Japan. Anytime you hear anyone talking about illegal migration, they're covering up the fact that they're mass migrating because for the workforce. We used to think that anti-migrationists used to point to Japan and say, well, here's an ethnically homogeneous society that won't accept migration, even though it has low fertility rates. That hasn't been true for 10 to 15 years. And we're starting to see it now seep into Japanese politics. But the Japanese are going to get their own Boris wave, because the government is going to focus their attention on illegal migration, which probably makes up maybe 1%, 2% of actual migration flows. I'm not justifying illegal migration, but it's only a small percentage. America is the exception, massive amounts of illegal migration, but that's a separate issue. So the only solution, there's actually only one solution to this problem, literally. In the short term, you have to set up a guest worker system. There's no alternative. You can't allow people to come and stay, and that's difficult. That's hard to do, and it's hard to implement, and it can sometimes actually feel quite unfair if somebody comes for 3 to 5 years, and then you throw them out of the country after working and paying tax there and maybe learning the language. But that's the only short-term solution. And the long-term solution is some sort of a family policy. So what I'm describing is the Hungarian solution. This is what we're doing in Hungary. They're engaging in a family policy to try and get fertility rates up in the long term, and they have a guest worker system in the short term. There's no alternative. And neither of these are easy to enforce policies. They're not. Even the guest worker system is not going to prove easy, because the guest workers themselves will start to demand rights, and maybe fairly. So it's difficult. I think on the family policy side, there's been an ongoing debate. I know we're having a family policy discussion in the next session, so I won't go too much into it. But I mean, on balance, I think it's been largely successful. I think there is evidence that it's got birth rates up, or at the very least, not allowed Hungarian birth rates to fall, for example, to Polish levels. But really, I think the biggest statistic that stands out in the Hungarian experiment is the fact that marriage rates have doubled. That's phenomenal. I mean, nobody can dispute that the family policy has doubled the marriage rate in Hungary. And I think that highlights that this is going to be a very slow rate of change, right? You're not asking people, I always tell economists who think about these things in statistical terms, this is not monetary policy. It's not lowering the interest rate to try and get people to take out mortgages. It's a completely different phenomenon you're dealing with. You have to change the culture, and cultural change will be gradual. So when you see a doubling of the marriage rate, you know that something deep has changed in the culture, and you see it in Hungary. Young women especially seem to want to get married. The latest experiment that they're running is very interesting. There's no income tax in Hungary up until 25, I think. And then they've currently put in place mothers under 30 get exempt from income tax as well. So basically, when you hit 25 as a woman, you're not paying income tax, and then at 25, you either pay the tax or have a child. And actually, I worked with somebody who took 2 years, 3 years out to have a child precisely because of this. So it's interesting. But we need to understand better some of the micro-level changes and what actually motivates people. The first micro-level study will come out of Hungary. It's an American academic doing it soon, and that will give us a lot more sense of what's working and what's not. A lot of fine-tuning needs to be done here. But there really is no alternative, and I think that Viktor Orban, not last summer, the summer before, said that we need to get replacement fertility rates by 2035. I think that's true everywhere. Central Europe, I'll just say very quickly, Central Europe's in a slightly better position for two reasons. I know the birth rates aren't great, but one of them is that there's a bit of productivity growth left. It's not as wealthy as the rest of Europe, so there's a little bit room to grow, I think probably about 5 years. And the second reason is that they have much lower debt levels, which gives a little bit more headroom as well. So I think Central Europe has until about 2035. I'm skeptical that Western Europe does. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pilkington. I would now turn the microphone for Marco Malaguti. So I was wondering, what are your observations on the issue that Mr. Pilkington raised about the family policy, and how do you see it from the Italian perspective?
Thank you. Well, about family policies and immigration, I would like to submit to you a point of view that was, and unfortunately still is, rarely thought about and studied, and which I can observe with my personal experience in Italy. And this is the role of welfare. So, how is linked welfare and social security to the immigration? I can speak about my country, but I think this fits a lot even with others. So we can see that welfare operates in two ways. First of all, as pull factor for immigrants, because we know that immigration today is very different than, for example, 30 years ago, when we had, for example, from Turkey, many people coming to work and stably live in Italy, in Germany, in the United Kingdom. But today we have people attracted by social benefits, by welfare benefits for their families, which changes a lot the faces of our cities. And at the same time, what welfare is doing to our society in Europe is to substitute family as social insurance for the future. Because you know, when you are pretty sure that in your, when you will be older, everything will be took in charge by the state, you don't need a family anymore. I remember my grandma always told me that when she was young, I'm talking about the period of the Second World War, but even before and even a little after, the couples decided to have marriage for having a future, for having someone who was able to take care of their future, and when they will be old, it will be someone who will take care of them, okay? So it was a matter of needing, not a romantic matter of love or creating a patriotic family. Of course, there is people that makes a family because of this, but it's a minority, and we can see the result of it today. So I think we should think how to reform European welfare, not only because it's not sustainable anymore for demographic reasons, but also because it's operating to lower our fertility, because family became just a furniture in our social landscape, but also because it's working actively for our substitutions in our cities. So the politicians have to take care a lot about this problem. I can make you an example. In my town, which is 13,000 inhabitants northwest of Bologna, 15 years ago, the mayor, and it's important to say that was not exactly a leftist, but a centrist Catholic, decided to officially call the maximum number possible of immigrants. When she said that, the immigrant population of my town was 3%, and after 15 years, now it's 18%. So how she called such people in my town? With welfare, with benefits. So we have to understand that immigration and demographic crisis is not like a storm or a blizzard. It's something that has reasons, that has to be studied, and we have to do it, and we have to understand that we need a cultural change, because we can help families, we can help Italian families, we can help European families, but if we don't change the cultural image of what a family is and what a family can do for our happiness, but above all for our security and our future, we don't solve this problem. I think, well, when I was at the elementary school, I remember that the professors continuously invited to my class former members of the Italian resistance during the Second World War. I think that would be very nice, for example, to invite to class elderly people who can explain to children, to young students, what it means to live alone at 80 years old or even more or even less, because we have to teach to the people what our complete trust in social security, in welfare, is destroying our life, and it's not helping our future, it's destroying our future. And in Italy, you know, it's very difficult to explain something like that, because we have a strong tradition of welfare, strong tradition of social fights in the former years, and we still have a powerful leftist galaxy. And but it's absolutely important, even because if you take a look of what the progressives are doing, they are trying, like Mamdani in New York, you can see, to go back to the socialist roots of some decades ago. So we have to absolutely don't underestimate this and what it could be, it could mean for our countries. And we have to understand that it's not Marxism, but it's important to understand that there is always an economical reason, I think, almost everywhere. And we have to understand that family is the key for resolving not only the problem of demographics, but also the problem of immigration. Because when we understand that family is our security, is our resistance cell, we can do a lot for our future. I want to close this little introductory remark with a statement of one of the most important Catholic priests of the last century in Italy, Don Giussani, who said, we don't need more state, we need more society. And that's what I mean. Thank you.
This is a very interesting perspective that how pensioner insurance policy, welfare policy is linked to immigration. As I was reading the novel Soumission by Michel Houellebecq, this was actually one of the first moves that was implemented by the imaginary fictional Muslim president to cut down the welfare system and the pensioner system and leave it back to the families in a way to nudge the families to have more children. And as I made this reference to France, Lucas, I am looking curious, what is your observation about this issue?
My first observation is that demography is not an important question or even a crucial question for the survival of our people. It's the only question. Demography makes history. And in history shows that it's not the technologically or morally advanced societies that prevail. There are therefore two complementary strategies, I think. Certainly putting in place pro-natalist policies, restoring the sacred. But I am not sure that the Eastern Europe countries that give tax advantages, for example, or limit the right of abortion, have many more births than in the Western Europe. So the problem is not there. I was talking about it at the dinner yesterday of the great replacement in France and more generally in the Western Europe. In south of Paris, in the metro, in the street, I am often the only white person. The problem is not longer the flow with stopping immigration, but the stock, the population already present. What must be implemented, especially in Western Europe, is remigration. Assimilation no longer works because we are in the turning point when quantity becomes quality. To avoid becoming a minority in our own soil, is it the only question? On the other hand, certainly there is a demographic winter in Europe because of materialism, individualism, nihilism. But a demographic spring is possible. I'll quote a great French thinker, Charles Maurras, who said that the despair in politics, it's absolute folly.
The question of whether assimilation can work and how can we integrate people who come from a very different civilizational background. We have a well-spoken expert on the field. Omar, what is your observations about the possibility of integration of people who come from a very different background?
Thank you very much for having me here. So I would like to invite you to a role-playing game. So imagine yourself being a 21-year-old young male individual from a conservative North African country, not to mention the country's name. You live in a dire economic conditions, but still you have your strict social codes. You respect the elders, you don't talk to other ladies on the streets, otherwise you will be beaten up by the brothers of this lady. You live under an authoritarian government, you have to respect the rule of the law, but still you cannot fulfill yourself because there's no economic conditions. And you open the social media and see your cousin, see your second cousin, or other young people of your own community who already made their way to Europe, and posing with BMWs, luxury cars, and with their friends who are from your country of origin. So you collect your money, you ask for loans, your mother sells her gold, and you pay the ticket to cross to Europe irregularly. Once you arrive, you see a society where you can shout at the police, something you cannot do back home. Otherwise, you will just be beaten up and taken into custody. You see a society where elderly people are not much respected. And when an incident happens on the subway, no one stands up to defend the lady. So how can you build a respect for the society? And you hear some rumors that in specific cities, the mayors, who are basically locals, are voting to remove the cross or any cultural symbols, not to affect anybody and hurt anybody's feelings. So you arrive from a strict cultural environment to an extremely liberal one, and basically you don't really meet the majority of the society there. Once you arrive to this European country of your destination, you meet with the people of your culture, you meet with people who are originally second or third generation from your country of culture, but already lost their original culture and living and formulating a very hybrid social environment, which has some similarities to the countries of origin, has some aspects from the European country, but mostly it's about the consumer culture. And it's mostly about, like, you should watch Netflix, drink your beer, make your money somehow, and live your life. So rather than investigating and blaming only the migrants about the lack of integration, lack of assimilation, I should point out to Europe's responsibility. So I strongly believe that a Europe which is strict to its own traditions and it articulates its own identity and a strong identity should have no problem with integrating other people, because assimilation would be the only choice to survive in these societies. However, we see that European identity, and we cannot talk about European identity because the beauty of Europe, that is made up of nation states of different background, nation states with histories and own identity formation. But we see that this notion of nation and religion is losing significance in Europe recently. Meanwhile, we are having big numbers of people coming from societies where identity is quite a strong thing. And I'm not only talking about religious identity, talking about a wider cultural identity which defines the people's lives. So, and of course, we cannot generalize between all the newcomers to Europe, because it's very much connected to the social status, to education, which defines how an individual can or cannot integrate to the society. But certainly we can see that, and we heard in the keynote, the American example, when big numbers of people representing a different culture arrive to any specific culture, they will make up parallel societies. They don't need to integrate to the majority of the societies. So to sum up, I strongly believe that European countries, European nation states should investigate their own identity, formulate their own identity based on own historical, cultural, religious heritage. Then after that, put up strong conditions for the newcomers to apply to, and to define what does it mean to be integrated, assimilated, and so on. Because it's now, as I see, it's still ongoing debates in many Western European countries.
Thank you for these ideas. I think this is one of the points that I wish to have addressed, that assuming the way that things are and the most probable trajectory, what does the presence of such a large population from a very different civilization or background mean for the future of Europe and the definition of what it means to be European in the upcoming decades? I'm wondering what is the take on this from all the panelists.
I know I'll give I'm sure people will give a more interesting, culturally interesting answer than me, but again, I just go back to this 15% number. That's pretty much where most countries are in the West right now, a couple excepted like Ireland, and of course Central Europe hasn't reached that level, okay? But Western Europe is pretty much around that 15% number. There can't be any more. Like, I'm slightly skeptical about the remigration issues. I just think they'll be really difficult to do. If they can get it done, more power to them. I think it could create civil war, but we'll see. But any more than 15%, like, it's not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work. You're not going to integrate that level of migration. Like, as I said, America had this extremely difficult time integrating 15%. It completely changed American culture. No one will admit this because they want to pretend that there's some sort of constitutional continuity. There isn't. It completely changed American culture. Any more than 15% is impossible. So I think for the Western European countries and for the Anglo countries, they need to switch to a new system now, guest workers, family policies, or I think by 2030 it'll be too late, to be honest.
Well, what I want to say is that I am maybe less pessimist, because I think that, as what I was saying at the beginning, today immigration is very different from what it was 30 years ago. I know, unfortunately, when immigration started in the United Kingdom, in France, it was another kind of immigration, and it's more difficult to talking about remigration in such context. At the same time, for what I can say about my town or my country, it's just social tourism. If you deactivate the contest that pulled these people in Italy, in Europe, I think that, okay, the problem would not be completely solved, but I think that we could do a lot, and we could change a lot what it means to live in an Italian city today and in the future. And also about the cultural context, what it means to grow up in such multicultural context. I can say that, of course, we have to put our efforts about rediscovering our identity, but also it's not just a matter of will. For the simple fact that we live in a context of massive immigration, we start spontaneously to ask ourselves who we are and where we come from. I was raised up, for example, in a social democratic family with agnostic education, agnostic atheist, and I think that without living in a context where the population is 20% Muslim, I never started to go to the church, but to be every day in front of Muslims, radical Muslim, gave me the will to know what it means to be religious and going to the church, and now I am practicant Catholic. So there are good aspects also in this kind of context.
The situation between Eastern and Western Europe is not the same, including in the question of remigration. It all depends on the country you are. I'm from France, and it's certainly the situation is complicated. In countries like my own, Germany, England, Belgium, we can be pessimistic. On the other end, for the Central European countries, that have maintained their pride and their identity, the game isn't over. There is several demographic examples gives us hope. Jews in Israel have more children than Arabs. 20 years ago, it was thought that Arabs would be the most numerous, winning a few decades. Menotynes in Bolivia still have 7 children per wife, while the rate is collapsing in the country. As a result, 2% of the Bolivians are native German speakers. Last example, the Amish in the United States, who double their populations every 20 years. Therefore, is a strong community ensures a future. The clear path forward is to rebuild strong communities. The Visegrad Group, Poland, Hungary, Czech, Slovakia, is an example for Western Europe because you have conscientiously refused replacement by protecting your borders and promoting pro-natalist policies.
Well, when it gets to migration, I think we are putting too much emphasis on the mere numbers and too little emphasis on the legal status. So I believe that Western European countries didn't make the mistake when inviting guest workers because the economies needed that. They made the biggest mistake when providing citizenship for people who are not on the level of eligible integration and when allowing family unification. And now we see that up to 10% non-European population in some Western European countries causing quite a big social and political tensions. Meanwhile, we should take a look on the Arab states, for example. Like the United Arab Emirates can live very happily with 80% foreigners for the reason that these foreigners will never get citizenship. Therefore, nobody questions the identity of the country, and if somebody commits any sort of crime, he or she will be sent back to the country of origin. So I believe what Europe should do first to make gaining citizenship extremely hard. Because once somebody gets citizenship, it means that he or she is a political actor and a social actor who cannot be neglected by the decision makers. And we can take the example of Hungary. So the Hungarian economy is in dire need for working hands, just like any European countries. And we see that we are having a guest worker program, which makes possible for citizens of specific countries, and it's the Hungarian government which decides which country to sign up for some companies who are mediating workers to some specific Hungarian firms who are in need for labor and cannot find this labor in the Hungarian market. And these people are eligible to stay in Hungary for 2 years only, and their status is expandable for 2 more years at most. So no family unification, no possibility to change the kind of working visa to any other sort of visa. So if somebody, for example, an individual from the Philippines has the desire to stay in Hungary because he or she met the love of his or her life, then he or she needs to go back home, reapply for a visa, and then can come back. So we cannot change the visas. So even with these tough conditions, we see that there's a big demand for this labor visa from these countries like India, Nepal, the Philippines, Vietnam, and we have 8 countries which the government has a contract with. So to sum it up, I believe that the example of Singapore and the Arab nations, the wealthy Arab nations, can provide a useful experience for Europe as well. So citizenship should be deserved, not be granted for free.
So to sum up the main thesis of speakers, Mr. Pilkington, you have stated that the maximum absorption rate of the country is 15% at maximum, so that the country retains the identity. Mr. Saifo, you are stating that a larger immigrant population may exist, but they must retain the status of not being citizens and not be granted permanent residency in the area. I was wondering what Mr. Malaguti and Sean Sorel, what are your takes on what is the largest possible threshold of this immigrant population so that the country maintains its identity?
Well, first of all, For answering correctly, I'd like to know what kind of immigrants we are talking about, because, for example, if we have immigrants from China, it's a thing, and if we have immigrants from Pakistan, it's another. But for what I can say about my country, I think that we have a Muslim population around 5%, and about Muslim immigration, I think we reached our limit. Of course, we can accept immigrants from, for example, Eastern Europe. We have many Ukrainians now who are coming, and also people from Georgia or also China, Philippines. This is another thing, completely another thing. But I think that when we have a Muslim population around 5–6%, especially like in Italy, where all of them are concentrated in some cities in the north, I think it's enough. About the rest, about the other immigrants, it's very hard to answer, but I think that we can have a more impressionist way of thinking about this problem. When I go out for a walk, to listen more than 2 different languages, I think it's enough.
A short answer, please, so that then we can please prepare your questions so that we can take 2 questions from the audience afterwards.
Unfortunately, I think that multicultural society is multi-conflictual society. We, the youth, long for a world we never knew, one of ethnic and cultural homogeneity. We want to return to this world. We demand a fundamental right, a simple right, the right of historical continuity. Looking ahead, I believe that if we continue with this uncontrolled immigration, we are heading towards a fragmented society, divided society. However, to respond to you, I don't believe in a racial civil war. Rather, I believe in a form of neo-feudalism, cultural enclaves with autonomous legal and value systems, where Sharia law is applied, where people seek protection from the local drug dealer, why people live in some neighborhoods and the other in other neighborhoods. One of the former French Minister of Interior, a socialist no less, Gérard Collomb, himself said, "We live side by side. I fear that tomorrow we will be living face to face."
So there is the first question with the gentleman in the 3rd row.
Jerzy Kwaśniewski from Ordo Juris Institute for Legal Culture. What is your take on the Migration Pact? Migration Pact of European Union will enter into force next year, and next year European Commission will announce the obligatory quotas of Slovakia, of Poland, of Finland, of Hungary, of migrants that will be transferred, the unwanted migrants that will be selected and transferred from Spain, France, Germany, Italy, and other countries. What is your take on that? Those countries that were responsible, that protected their borders, that you prize, will be ordered to accept migrants. The second is that in the following days, Matthias Corvinus Collegium, together with Ordo Juris, will publish our 2nd joint report after the Great Reset of the European Union. This one will be dedicated to the taking back the power on migration from Brussels to the nation states, so that we will take over the control on the migration policies back from those who have failed. The 4th issue is, whenever I hear young conservative men speaking on demography, I think that you are the best source of knowledge for us all. If you have 3 or more kids, share your success story. Were there any cultural, social, or legal factors that were important for that? And if you have 2 or less, say us, why have you failed to provide simple replacement? Were there any social cultural, or legal aspects that made you not to have more?
I'll speak to the first question on the quotas. Any country that doesn't want this, get ready for a fight with the Commission. Like, and look what's happened with Hungary. I mean, Hungary's being fined €1 million a day for not accepting migrants from 2015. The good thing is that the Commission has very limited enforcement mechanisms. They're not going to send the European army because the European army doesn't exist, and a European FBI doesn't exist either. So they have very limited enforcement mechanisms. The enforcement mechanisms are going to be fines, and they're going to be withholding European structural development funds. So the countries that want to oppose that, get ready to lose your structural development funds and get ready to get fined. I would say learn from the Hungarian model on that, put some money into outward-facing media, try and get like the rest of the world to know that this is happening. It's kind of important. It puts pressure on the politicians. And then beyond that, you just have to elect a nationalist government. I'm very scared for the quota system plus the Polish government currently. I think they're going to might accept the quota, and you can't take it back. You know, so you need a nationalist government, and you need a good game plan, and you need to budget for it.
Please, everyone, please try to be brief in your answers.
Well, concerning the Migration Pact, I think that obviously we have to oppose it, and we have to use all our efforts against it. I say it as an Italian. Even for our country, it's difficult because we are continuously under the pressure of the left, who says, you see, your conservative friends in Hungary, in Poland, are letting you alone, so they are our enemies, and we have, and you conservatives too, has to accept this pact, but we have to be courageous enough to say no, even if this means more pressure on our country, because the problem must be solved in our country. To be sovereignist, it means that if Italy has a problem with immigration, we have to resolve this problem by ourselves. But I want to say also another thing. The problem is not only the European Union, but also the international NGOs who are putting pressure against our islands, southern islands. And about the second question, I totally agree with you. Personally, I have sons, and I would like to have more. But at the same time, I know that it's important. Of course, I love to be father, but we have to teach that it's not a matter of love, it's a matter of future, it's a matter of living secured and cared, not just about having a nice trad family. We need security.
Okay, please, 2 sentences answer from Lucas and Omar.
Thank you for your question, Mr. I agree with you. I am 26 years old, and I have time to make children, I hope. For the first question about this immigration pact, of course, we have to restore our national border. And for this question, I am sovereignist.
I don't want to escape your last question, so I only have 2 children because they are waking up us all night, and my wife and my brain is barely functioning to think about the third one. So, as for the migration pact in Europe, I think our luck is that most of the European countries mostly affected by mass migration seem not to trust the European government, to put it that way. So we see that most of the nation states already took the issue in their hand. To see, if we take a look on Italy's example, who are signed in partnership with North African countries as gatekeepers to keep people away. And we can also take a look on Sweden, for example, once a declared humanitarian superpower. Now the government is quite affected by the Swedish Democrats who are representing a huge percentage of the Swedish population who are quite fed up with the uncontrolled mass migration. And they are seeming to adapt some Danish policies on their migration system, which is quite tough in the European standard. So what we can see that a wall around Europe is being built brick by brick, but the problem is that there's always a hole between the bricks. So in an ideal world, there should be one strong statement against uncontrolled mass migration, but still we see that it's the individual nation states who are taking the issue in their hand, and they are not waiting for the European Pact to be implemented, because the politicians who want to be re-elected are simply running out of time and using ground for those who are willing to respond to this issue.
Thank you very much. We have also run out of time. And it has been my pleasure to host Mr. Omar Saifo from Matthias Corvinus Collegium. Lucas Chancerel from Lenid. Marco Malaguti from Centro Machiavelli. And Philip Pilkington from the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs. My name is Andrzej Kolarek, and I have been moderating the discussion on immigration and the changing demographic face of Europe.